Welcome to Green Building Matters, the original and most popular podcast focused on the green building movement. Your host is Charlie Cicchetti, one of the most credentialed experts in the green building industry and one of the few to be honored as a LEED Fellow. Each week, Charlie welcomes a green building professional from around the globe to share their war stories, career advice, and unique insight into how sustainability is shaping the built environment. So settle in, grab a fresh cup of coffee, and get ready to find out why green building matters.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. I love doing these podcasts. Been doing it for 4.5+ years. And, I get to expand my network a little bit, my thinking, and because I get to interview a green building professional somewhere in the world. And today we've got a special guest. We actually have the director of LEED at the U.S. Green Building Council, and he's had a couple different roles there and even a storied background before that. But we got Wes Sullens on today. He's out in Oakland, California. Wes, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, despite all the heat. We're in the middle of a heat wave here. It's September. It was 111 or 12 yesterday at my house. Anyway, other than that, doing fine.
Other than that, big problem in global warming, yes. But no, man, I hope things get better.
Get there.
I know it can be a beautiful fall in the Bay Area coming up. Well, Wes, I love to ask all my guests on the podcast, just, hey, take us back. So where'd you grow up and go to school?
Yeah, great. And first of all, thanks, Charlie, for hosting this and inviting me. Pleasure to be here. I mean, where did I grow up? That's a long story. I'll try to keep it short. I guess the best way you could say it is I had hippie parents.
Sure.
And
me too.
I was actually born in Tennessee, kind of in a communal living area environment. But my parents quickly realized they wanted to live in California. They always loved California. And so we moved out there when I was young. And anyway, I ended up going I lived in San Francisco, Richmond, Oakland, bounced all around, and eventually landed in Stinson Beach. So if you haven't been out to Northern California, I'm biased because I live there, but I think it's one of the most beautiful places on earth. And it's just an amazing place to be. So we lived in a scrappy little one-room shack near the beach, walking distance to the beach. And eventually lived in Bolinas and all around the area until I went to school in Petaluma, which is a little farther north and more inland. They have things like high schools there. So anyway, just from the early days was always outdoors, at the beach, in the woods. We had very little money, so we didn't vacation. Our vacation was living where we wanted to be. So camping, hiking, that was our stuff.
Man, to what part of Tennessee? I'm curious because I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm just curious, where was that origin at?
It was in Summertown, Tennessee, outside of Nashville, I guess a couple hours. I haven't been back there in many years, actually.
Wow. But, and now Northern California for the rest of that story. And sorry, I interrupted you there. But you're growing up so close to nature and close to the Pacific Ocean. But, later going to college there too, right?
Yeah, I've been here ever since. And my dad was kind of a self-made contractor. He was a house painter and retired a few years ago. But that was my intro into the construction industry. So I spent summers, weekends, all the way through college painting houses with my dad. And we had a whole family crew for a while. My uncles would help and my brother and my sister would help. My mom even helped out sometimes. Definitely a family business. And we mostly painted these gorgeous houses out in Marin County, San Francisco as well. Worked on some just beautiful Victorians and these mansions that overlook the ocean. And so that was a big influence on me, was being around construction sites, even from a very early age, and painting in particular, because, you're breathing a lot of fumes, you're dealing with chemicals, you're dealing with waste. There's a lot of waste in paint, all the paper and tape and plastic sheeting and all that stuff. So I think from an early age, I realized there's a connection there between your health, the environment, and these beautiful homes and environments we're trying to live in. So that was a big influence on me. And I eventually made my way to college. You're right. It was first I started, I didn't know what I wanted to be. So I started at the junior college, and that was the low-cost option, the local option. There was a brand new campus in Petaluma, and it was great. I had some amazing teachers. I took every class I wanted. I was English, psychology, history. I was all into the arts. And long story, but I eventually met a teacher there. It was one of my influences, Gloria de Blasio, who was teaching a course in Italy, like a semester abroad. And so I had a chance to go there and it just blew my mind, like going overseas for the first time and seeing the world and just being in a different place in Florence, Italy for about I guess 3 or 4 months. That's all it took. It totally opened my eyes. And when I came back, I'm like, I got to get serious. I got to buckle down. And I applied for Sonoma State, the California State University. And I said, I haven't done science. I might as well try that. So I went for a bachelor's of science degree. And they had this killer little program called Environmental Studies and Planning, which was kind of a small program, very small, but had some really great teachers and had good accolades. And I mean, all my teachers were like Stanford, Berkeley alumni, but they wanted to live in this small town up slightly north of there. So that was just a great experience.
Holy cow. A lot of really good influences there for sure. And you're right, mentors, that is something I love to ask about. So, I believe that degree, that undergrad was energy management and design. And next thing you know, shortly after that, LEED was coming out in the year 2000. So, was it more energy efficiency, renewables? If you think back to that curriculum when you're getting that degree, Wes, like what were you studying at the time? I don't know if LEED was too early, right?
LEED was in the wings. I graduated in 2000. So you'd hear little rumors of this thing, LEED. And Lynn Simon even came to our college one time or came to our thing. And we were like, this person is amazing. And so it was kind of in the winds towards the end of my work there. But I had some amazing teachers. I mean, talk about mentors at that college. One of my professors was a disciple of Buckminster Fuller. So I learned all about Bucky and how to think differently about problems. Like that guy was amazing. Jay Baldwin was his name. We had another teacher who was an ex-Navy pilot from long ago who was a energy guru. And he just had a love of energy efficiency. And he made us do energy calculations by hand. He had this philosophy. If you're going to trust a computer to do your energy simulation, you got to know what it's doing behind the scenes. So he made us go by hand and calculate the energy efficiency of a building. And never forget that work. I mean, it's just so important. But anyway, it was a great program. And I landed a job from one of my professors, had a friend who liked to hire folks out of that program. And I ended up in Oakland at a consulting firm called Zenergy. X-Energy, just like the Xerox days, right? Yeah. Which that company quickly became Kima and then DNV. I think it's DNVGL or something like that now. Gotcha. So they got acquired. But yeah, I did energy efficiency to begin with. I did, rebate program administration, would check, did lighting audits, cost studies for equipment, thing like that. Yeah, it really started out in energy efficiency as my place.
I love it. Yeah, because you had all these influences to do something environmental. Then the building side starts coming together with your studies and in the early 2000s, energy efficiency. And then tell us what was next. I mean, I know you spent a lot of years at StopWaste and still more ASHRAE energy audits. By then, you've already got some LEED experience, right? So just tell us how this career continued to stack. Yeah,
thanks. So at Zenergy, I kind of got hired into this energy group, but I quickly met kind of a soulmate of mine, Jeff Cyphers, person that was an engineer there, super smart. And he was also passionate about sustainability. And they had just done, right as I got hired, they had just completed a study for the city of Portland on the cost of green buildings. And I think it was 1999 or something. And it was the cost of green. It was looking at after construction, theoretically, how much would it have costed to do a couple buildings to LEED? And it was one of the first cost studies ever. And it showed that it was not a big increase. And, a couple of years later, the Greg Katz study came out, of course. But that was important because we went after an RFP from this little place called StopWaste. And our qualification was that one study saying the cost of LEED. And honestly, at that time, there was nobody else really with much more experience than that. So we won the contract. So me and Jeff, all of a sudden from being, we had this little tiny contract that kept getting added to every year because it was just growing. And it was to consulting on LEED projects. So the county of Alameda, where StopWaste is, they had a green building program. And they were going to give out some grants for projects that were interested in LEED because they were trying to target construction waste. And so we helped administer the grant. We provided technical assistance. We wrote guidelines. And we helped them through LEED. Meanwhile, we did a few LEED projects consulting as well. And I'll tell you, that was in 2001. By 2006, when I left Zenergy Kima, we had about 8 employees full time, and it was kind of had a whole sustainability arm. And that's what we were doing full time, was LEED consulting primarily and other sustainability work.
Oh man. Yeah. And that was still early, but right place, right time. And I love that the cost studies, right? What does it cost? And as we know, those costs continue to go down as more and more can have the LEED conversation. And we've seen green buildings, really still make good business sense. So any other mentors or influencers, and then we'll move on to accomplishments.
Yeah, so many. I mean, so much of this movement of green building has been people that come before us, right? We're standing on the shoulders. I mean, at StopWaste, I left Kima's Energy to go to StopWaste, which was our client for all those years. And I managed the green building program there. And there were folks like Wendy Summer, Mary Saul, and Ludwig. They were all managing the green building program, some of the first. And we helped write guidelines. We wrote multifamily guidelines, the first kind of rating system for multifamily in the Bay Area, at least, that eventually went statewide. There was a lot of experts there that I was just was so eager and excited to be with these legends. And then I got to go to Greenbuild, the first one. That was, I guess, back in 2001. I went to Greenbuild and kept going and just would see these folks, Kevin Hides, Andrea Traver, Lynn Simon, David Godfrey. Got to meet David, and he's now a friend. And, it's just been amazing to be part of this community of these folks in the beginning. And I was just kind of this, bright-eyed, kind of excited person who was a wannabe back then and just wanted to help out any way I could. And It's just been fun. Yeah, there's just so many good influences in this community.
Those are some legends there. One more look back. What are some of your proudest accomplishments so far?
Oh, boy. Well, one time we painted a house from Julia Morgan, the famous architect.
Yeah,
that was kind of neat.
That's awesome.
But professionally, I'd say writing the multifamily guidelines was a huge milestone. This was a book that is now part of the Greenpoint rated program in California, but it was really the first comprehensive guidelines from 2004. That was just a year long. I just dove in. I mean, I read all the environmental building news and every article you could find online, and we came up with these guidelines. So that was a big one. And then working at StopWaste, got to do a lot of firsts in terms of LEED, like the first platinum building that was a major renovation, which StopWaste was their headquarters. The first building, that was also the first building to get LEED for a LEED V4, and just had a ton of grants and things like that. I guess the other company, I'd say one, I'd be remiss if I didn't say the LEED Fellow. That was hard. I didn't pass it the first time, and that was a lot of work to get, and that was definitely an accomplishment.
And for those listening, Wes is a LEED fellow here, and you're right. It's not like all of a sudden someone taps you on the shoulder and you get it. It's quite the process. It's peer nominated, many different forms of back and forth and committees, and it's pretty selective. So, man, congrats on that. That's got to be validating for especially that early work you did, and now in the role, of course, that you've transitioned to, which we'll talk about next. But I'm going to ask about materials, because as I look at your bio, even before you were on staff at the USGBC, if I have it right, you really started, doing some things with some of the technical committees, or maybe the tag around materials, I think. So tell us why materials and what have you been doing there? And then we'll talk today.
Yeah. Materials have always been a passion. And, I kind of started out with residential products and materials, given the multifamily guidelines, some of the other work I did. But that's one of the first things that we did as consultants back in the day was, one thing about energy efficiency and commissioning and such, but the other big new thing for people doing LEED early days was materials, recycled content, construction waste. These were things nobody was really tracking that much. So, and then working at StopWaste, we're able to get some funding and do some work on things like measuring the carbon footprint of materials. And I'm talking like 2006, 2007, 8, and even later. And we had like a climate calculator for Greenpoint rated at one point. And I think what I was sharing that in these circles at one point, and I heard about the LEED technical advisory group. So I applied and I got on it, which was great. I think that was in 2011 or 12 or something like that. So I became a volunteer for the LEED tag, the materials and resources tag, and served the full term there and had kind of a front row seat from the conversion of LEED 2009 to LEED V4, which was pretty amazing, like the changes going on in the industry. And LEED before was looking at, EPDs and life cycle analysis and all these things that, again, we had never heard of as an industry. So it was amazing to be there as part of that.
Man, that is really neat. Okay, so let's talk about what's keeping you busy today. As I understand it, you've had a few years on the director on the technical side, still some material work, but in the last 3 years, man, all things helping steer LEED and these next iterations. So tell us about the U.S. Green Building Council and some of what you've been doing and kind of what's keeping you busy today.
Yeah, well, LEED is keeping us busy. That's the thing. And you've probably seen that we've got some big plans for the future of LEED, what comes next. And, there's been some talk and criticism about what LEED needs to do in the future. And so we're trying to answer that and have a solid, climate-focused solution. So what comes next in LEED, that's exciting to us. We're starting to create some documents around what we're planning to be. There was a Future of LEED released, like a document, a roadmap released a few months ago that kind of outlined what we're planning to do on carbon and resilience and equity and all these topics that are so important to the rating system. Yeah. So kind of behind the scenes on the staff side, we're working to get that ramped up, to put the pieces in place so that we can start to really create the next version of LEED, while also maintaining, of course, the existing rating systems that are out there. But that's really what's keeping us going is thinking about the future.
Yeah. No, LEED's been good to me. It's been good to you. It's almost like there's this 20 plus year, hey, LEED, you help have the conversation, certified buildings all over the world and put green buildings on the map. So now it's your responsibility to do more. And I'm sure that's what some of you and the team are probably feeling and from the critics. And, but I just want to thank you and all the USGBC staff. It still continues to be a great program, a global leading program. And you're right. It's hard to be one size fits all. I mean, there's new priorities, but, let's keep tweaking. So to our listeners, I'll put a link to that recent publication infographic so everybody can read up on it. But Wes, give us a peek a little more into your world. I know there's some staff, obviously, in the Washington, D.C. area. There's some remote staff and you have a lot of meetings, a lot of research, or kind of, what's a day look like for Wes?
Oh, boy. They're always different. That's what keeps it exciting and fun.
Good.
And I'm a remote employee. I'm out in California, the Bay Area here, like you said. So it's been interesting through the pandemic. We were all remote employees for a while. And the office is now going back to work. So I think we're closer than we've been as a team, which is interesting. Still definitely need to get in person, that kind of thing, like at Green Build coming up. But yeah, the day-to-day, it's all over the place. Like some days I'm working on, the other thing I work on is green building codes. So that takes up a bit of my time. There's some things happening locally with CalGreen and the state and things like that. But primarily it's working with the LEED team and our committees. We have a great set. If you haven't heard, folks, we have committees that are technical advisory groups for LEED of all the credit categories. And also there's LEED advisory committees and LEED steering committee and things. And so we spend quite a bit of time working with those volunteers to fine tune places in LEED that need to be updated or to, again, think about the future of what comes next. So we're working on, right now, actually, we're talking about call for volunteers, like who's the new folks going to be for our next year of committee volunteers. But really underlining all of this is what's coming next in LEED. That's where we're putting all of our attention and energy. And so to get a little more specific, carbon, we know climate change is the number one issue, of course, but we can't be blindsided on that. But for the next version of LEED, we need to look, what does that look like in LEED? Is it a new credit category? Is it requirements that are about reducing embodied carbon? Of course, we need to get to zero, but should we go beyond that? And there's a lot of talk around regenerative, especially talking about materials and resources and impacts. Like it's, the whole less bad is not enough. We actually have to do positive and do good. So really where I'm excited is the regenerative talk. How do we take buildings and have them be a part of the solution and actually create better environments and better communities and all the way ripple down through the supply chain? Better products, better materials means better lives down the supply chain, fence line communities, all of that. So it's really challenging. We're going to have to, cut off some things at some point, but for now it's all on the table and we're just learning and soaking up and sponging up all the good ideas that are out there. That's what keeps us busy. That means talking to code people, talking to environmental organizations, forestry groups, BA. I mean, just it depends. Week to week, we're talking to all these folks, experts in real estate, ESG, embodied carbon. It just goes on and on. Of course, energy efficiency, refrigerant experts. We're doing it all. We're trying to kind of map the universe, and then we're going to do what we do, which is start to write credits around it starting next year.
And it reminds me a little bit of, 2009 and, going from LEED version 2.2 to LEED version 3. And, hey, that was a long time ago. Hard to believe, and that's okay. Now, I know you probably don't have an exact timeline, but could you give a very wide range to remind our listeners here, Wes, if there's going to be some updates, it could be out for ballot. This will take a little time, but it sounds like you're trying to move quickly with it. I mean, any prediction on when we might have a newer version of LEED to take a look at? We're on LEED version 4, version 4.1 now. So it's just anything you could share if possible. And if not, I understand, but coming soon.
Yeah, the goal is to have something to share next year, probably at Greenbuild-ish. That's where we tend to bring things to our community.
Thanks.
So yeah, we've got 6 months or so of hard work, and then we start to put all the pieces together and share that with the community.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's the goal.
It'll happen. And all right, so let's. We've been talking about a little bit of what's next for LEED, but maybe outside of LEED, if you had a crystal ball, what are you getting excited about? What in the future of green buildings, the future of sustainability? Anything you kind of read up on? What else is coming at us?
Yeah, well, from the materials side, I really am interested in circularity and having the circular economy and having it realized. I mean, there's so many good ideas, but actually executing a circular economy is so challenging. So I see that as a place where you need kind of the right supportive policies, and you need leading innovation from companies and manufacturers, and then you need something like LEED or other triggers that allow to capture that value outside of just the first cost of products or materials. So circularity, I think, is a really important concept that, we've always been kind of playing with in LEED. The recycled content and all those have been in there, but really going double down and getting into the business case and seeing interesting new business ventures and models, that's where it's at. So I see that happening not just in buildings, that's in all kinds of products. And maybe it starts in another product category. It's already starting in consumer products and beverages and things like that. You're seeing packaging that's becoming more circular or fashion, that kind of thing as well. So that there's just so many impacts. So I think circular economy is one that we need to keep track of. Another one is regenerative. We've said it already, but how do we get beyond just zero? So carbon storing materials, like getting the science of that. How do you sequester carbon in products and materials? And is that a real thing? There's a lot of interest around like offsets and things, but there's also a lot of fuzzy math out there. So how do you cut through all that and get to true solutions that add value and make for a better environment? So I see sequestration, kind of ways to capture carbon and circularity. Yeah.
And I agree with all of that. And, to all of our listeners, ask yourself, how can you help speed all that up if you believe it too? And, Wes, this will be saved in the cloud so you and I can listen back on it one day and, see how correct we were. But I love it. And I'm happy to hear LEED's going to try to incorporate a little bit of all that in some pieces. That's going to be great. So let's get to know Wes a little more. Some rapid fire questions. What would you say is your specialty or gift?
Oh, man. I don't like to talk about myself. Yeah. I think what I try to do, and given my background, watching all these kind of giants in the industry around me, is I try to, I'm not the one who comes up with the great ideas, honestly. I'm usually the one who puts those into practice and helps to scale them up. That tends to be my role. So I don't know if that's a gift or whatever, but listening to smarter people around me and amplifying it. Like an example is like the green building code in California. When that was first starting, I was there at the table and lots of good ideas were made there. But ever since then, I've been helpful to kind of scale up that green code, make it mandatory in more places. And now at USGBC, I help with the International Green Code, the IGCC. And which is, again, these are just collections of good ideas. But the point is, how do we scale it up? How do we get it more influential? So I think that's probably it.
That is a gift. Yeah. There's There's visionaries, there's integrators. And in your case, I think you're taking it further and saying, hey, how do we scale this up? And those codes, that's pretty far reaching with that impact, man. So I don't know if you ever just sit and think you've had a big influence on LEED, California building codes, and now, like you said, the international. So that's a big deal. So do you have any good habits or routines, rituals?
Oh, man. I got to get out in nature. I'll just say that. Like, this work is awesome. It's great, but sitting at a computer is hard. And using your brain and thinking about all these topics can be infuriating, demoralizing, all that if you think too much about the climate that's changing around us and such. So I got to get out there, got to get into nature, get in the trees. So I love exercising, bikes, hikes, water, and all. So I try to get out as much as possible every day, a little bit, and then bigger trips. It's getting harder because I have kids. And now they're with school and sports. It's like there's not a lot of free time, but that's also my other thing I like to do, which is watch my kids play sports. They play ice hockey. It's really fun. And just watching them come alive when they're so excited. They love it. They're happy. That feeds me. It's really nice.
And you get that from your childhood, as you shared with us, that being out in nature. So I love it. I love you doing that with your kids. Okay, so as we get to know each other more, I'm a fan of a bucket list. So could you give us a peek? What are a couple things on Wes's bucket list? Maybe some adventures, some travel. Maybe you want to write a book. Who knows?
Oh, man, bucket list. I have not given that much thought. I do want to ride my bike to Point Reyes. I don't know if you've been out to the Bay Area, but start from somewhere and ride to Point Reyes. That would be super fun.
Nice.
So I got to get in shape enough to do that. And not an e-bike. My kid tells me I cannot get an e-bike until I'm after 60.
That's
so that's one. I'd like to get back to New Zealand. I traveled there once years ago, and it was just amazing. So I want to go back there. And actually, somehow, how do we get a carbon neutral travel? That's one thing. I do love to travel. So getting back to Europe and traveling post-pandemic. I mean, it's pretty simple at this point, honestly. Like, the bucket list is like getting life back to normal a bit and getting out and doing things while I'm still able and active. I don't have like jump out of an airplane or any of that stuff. Pretty risk averse.
Yeah, that's funny. Thanks for giving us a peek there. I love it. And yeah, what is that normal? And in that carbon neutral travel, it comes in pieces, but it's still a little more to do there. That's for sure. That can sometimes be the biggest carbon footprint, right? Is the jet plane. But I love the bucket list items. Thanks for sharing. Let's talk about books. Is there a book you'd recommend? It doesn't have to be about our industry or buildings, just a good book you'd recommend to our listeners.
Not a huge reader, but actually one I'm reading now, got it here with me. It's kind of a strange one, or not strange, but just I just picked it up because I'm going to New York for a work trip. And every time I go there, I try to go to Greenwich Village.
Nice.
And I'm reading a book called Romany Marie. She's self-called the Queen of Greenwich Village. Okay. And she was somebody who ran a restaurant in the 1915 to 1940 or something in Greenwich Village, various restaurants. And it was just the enclave for bohemians at the time. They would come there and write poetry or do songs or whatever. Bucky Fuller would go there and get some great ideas. So I like to kind of go hang out in that area of New York. I've only been there a couple times and think about what it was like back then. And, I'm sure all those buildings are probably gone now and replaced, but there's a few things left.
Sure.
And that's one that's just fun to read and think of the place that I'm going to.
Solid recommendation, man. I love that because it's helping you prepare for that trip. And then you connected it back to Fuller. So, man, great recommendation. We'll put a link to that book in the show notes. So a couple more things here. This is a fantastic interview. I'm really enjoying getting to know you more. So let's talk career advice. Is there anything you wish you'd known a little earlier in your career?
I don't know. I've been so fortunate. It's hard to say something I would have received earlier. I think one of the things was to, I guess what I would tell somebody in my shoes today would be like, don't worry so much about where you get on this bus, if you will, this journey towards sustainability, towards regenerative environmental issues. Just get on. I mean, pick your place, see where you're good at something and enter. And I think that's kind of what I did and got the advice from everyone was like, if it's energy efficiency, great. If it all of a sudden turns into green building, go for it. If it's building codes, if it's circular economy, just ride the wave, man. Get on and ride it. That's, I toyed with getting graduate degrees and things like that over the years. And a couple of years later, I find myself working with those same people on projects. And it's just like, once you're in the ecosystem doing good work, there's kind of there's a harmony to it, or a synergy or something that happens. So that's what I would give advice to. I know you're asking what advice I wish I would have had. I think it would have been that. Just like, don't worry so much about the path. Just go in it full force with all the effort you can, and good things will happen.
Solid advice. That's a good nugget. All right, last question. Let's say someone's listening to this podcast. They're really getting excited about the green building movement. Green building movement's been good to you. It's been good to me. And they're just now jumping in. They might be early in their career, or they might be making a career pivot. But they are saying, hey, green buildings is next for me. As we close, any words of encouragement?
Come on in. The great thing about this industry, at least from my perspective and my history in it, is, nobody has all the answers. We know that. We're all kind of doing the best we can in directions that we can. So if you're interested in coming into this career field and joining it, again, get on the train anywhere you can, and don't be afraid to come up with new ideas. This group is all about innovation. I mean, from the beginning, from LEED, from all these concepts we've talked about, living buildings and all that stuff, it's all new. We're rewriting some history there. One of my favorite, I'm going to share a quote or a paraphrase. One of my favorite rock artists is Roger Waters from Pink Floyd, of course. And he said some quote somewhere like, they were asking about The Wall. I know this is a tangent, but the album The Wall, the great seminal album. They were asking him, how can you do this? This is like an epic. You're writing like a movie or a story or something, and it's too much for rock and roll. And he responded saying, you can't tell me the limits of my art. Like, I am here this is a new rock art form. It's still a new form. We're folding it. We're molding it. You can't tell me the limits of what I'm here to do. But I think he went on to write an opera and stuff. I'm not sure how successful that was. But the point is, green buildings, we're still early. I mean, I worked with people at StopWaste that were in recycling for 30 years before we even started. And, think of it, like, we'll be the veterans soon, Charlie, and we need all the new ideas that are going to come up behind us. So anyway, don't think we have all the ideas. Don't be afraid to jump in.
Come on in.
We need it.
Man, what good encouragement, and great quote. So thank you for sharing. And so to everybody, make sure you connect with Wes on LinkedIn. Let them know what you thought of this interview. And Wes, thank you for your time. I just can't wait to see what's next for LEED, and I'm glad you're helping steer this. So thanks for everything you do.
Thank you, Charlie, and thank you for all you do for this industry, these podcasts, the work you do with the fellows. You're a gem. Thank you so much. Appreciate being asked to be here.
I just want to say thank you to our loyal listeners. We actually are celebrating over 1 year here on the Green Building Matters podcast. Me and the entire team were stoked and just so glad you continue to listen every Wednesday morning to a new interview with a green building professional here in this industry, or just some pro tips that we want to make sure that you are getting straight from us, straight to you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At GBES.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to GBES.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode. And you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.